Vitami, we welcome you. We welcome you here at historic St. Casimir's. You know, up in our altar in the front, I left it at home because we march in St. Patrick's Day Parade. We have a big sign that says, "We trust in Jesus." Because when the church was closed, we adopted divine mercy. We went straight to Jesus, you know. And everybody else was praying for us, and the Blessed Mother too. St. Casimir's Parish is the second oldest Polish parish in Cleveland proper. In the whole state of Ohio, the Diocese of Berea, in the 1890s, 1880s, Berea was like, you know, being in Cincinnati. You had to go there by horse and buggy. So St. Stanislaus was the oldest parish. And in the 1870s, late 1870s, and people were living out this way. It was a White Motor Company. They made sewing machines, some horse-drawn carriages. And they were traveling all the way to Broadway. It probably took them a while to get there. I don't know if they had streetcars then. And in 1891, this parish was established. They went to the bishop and established it. And I understand they went to the bishop and said, "We'd like to build a church on St. Clair Avenue. There's too many churches on St. Clair Avenue. You could build any place else." So what happened, the bishop figured, hey, you're not going to build anything. So they went to a farmer over here. His name was Joseph Hoffman. He was a German Catholic. He donated all this land to them. So anybody of German background, you have a footing right here in the church. You know, Maximum Kolbe too. A lot of people don't know, Maximum Kolbe's father's family were 3 generations in Poland. His father fought in the Polish cavalry from Germany, and his mother was Polish. So again, we're all interwound together. I said in Polish and Russian and Slovak and everything, hello, a couple different languages. There's so many different people here, and we're all Catholics, and we all take care of each other. And that's what we learned here around the street. So the parish started in 1871. Next door there was a building over there, Victorian, had a school and a church, and it grew and grew and grew. And I think one time there was about 10,000 people coming here. And then finally, before World War I, they decided they're going to build a big church. This seats 1,260 downstairs. You could put another 50, 60 people up in the choir loft, and another 100 people would stand around. So you could pack about 1,400 people into this church. And so this was dedicated, church building, 1918. This is the second building you'll see on here. And this type of architecture is what the American architectural term called Polish cathedral style. That's a term that's used all over the whole world. It's not just for Polish churches, because usually the great church builders in America were the Germans and the Poles. If you go to any city, the Germans built the Gothic churches, and some of the Poles followed with St. Stanislaus or like Nativity in Lorraine. And then like this particular style is Renaissance and Baroque. And Church of St. Casimir, that's St. Casimir. He died when he was about 23, 24 years old of consumption, TB. He's buried in Vilno, or Vilnius. That was part of the Commonwealth of Polish Lithuania. And he was a very religious man. He was dedicated to the Blessed Virgin. He wore hareskin. He gave all his clothes away. He slept on the floor. And I didn't really know much about him until I came here, 2009. I joined when they were on the street. And if you look up at the ceiling, all the pictures are up there of the Blessed Mother, Queen of Heaven, the Assumption, and everything else. So it's so fitting that St. Casimir is here with the Blessed Mother. And over there we have a picture of our icon, Our Lady of Czestochowa. That's not the original. It disappeared when the church was closed. That was just a brief history. And again, Mass 11:30, it's bilingual. We have books you can follow. Both. I turned it over to John Nejelik. John Nejelik's family from Warsaw, like my mother was. They came here in 1913, and his family's been parishioners all the generations. Myself, I'm originally baptized Polish National Catholic. My dad was Rus and Slovak. So I covered National Catholic, Roman Catholic, Greek Catholic, and Orthodox. So, I kind of universal. So that's why I invite everybody here, because we're one family. John?
Okay, thank you so much, Joe. Okay, my name is, like Joe said, John Angelic. I did grow up around the neighborhood. Somebody was asking me. Yes, I grew up over on Shishko and 84th, but I moved out like everybody else did in the late 1960s due to the riots and so on. But I returned, and thank God I got to see my daughter actually got married at the church then in 2013. But here's a little, I'll pass this around. Here's a little picture of the original building, 1892, right next door. And it was a church and a school combined. I'll just pass that around to you folks over there. And believe it or not, like in the 1920s, there was like 1,200 kids going to school there. Hard to believe, I know. The school that we have in the back there closed, I think, in 1977. Which is the newer school, they call it. But because of enrollment and everything else that happened, when people left the community, the school closed. So as Joe said, this building was made like in the 1915, 16, 17, 18 area. Dedicated. It was built during the last pandemic, in other words.
Right before.
So the people that came here, they weren't obviously wealthy people, but they gave everything they had to build this church. So in 2009, as many of you know, the Bishop of Cleveland closed 55 churches in 2009, this being one of them. And in November of 2009, the Bishop came to close St. Casimir Church. And of course it was a very, very sad day. And we feel something miraculous happened that day and right after to allow the church to be open. But on that sad November day when the bishop did come to close the church, we had a 97-year-old altar boy. His name's Walter. And now Walter is a hero to us for several reasons, which I'll explain here. But Walter was in 2 concentration camps as a Polish soldier. He escaped out of the one, and they threw him in Bergen-Belsen to die. But the war ended, and he did not starve to death. But he could not come back to Poland because he was a Polish soldier. He would have been arrested again. So he came to America, and he became our altar boy. And the reason I bring this up is that when the church was really closed, Walter talking right now.
You turned the heat on.
All the time. But when the church was being closed, the bishop came to close the church, and there was a makeshift podium sitting right up here that day. I was here. And Walter was very busy because he pulled the plug on the microphone to the bishop when he came up to speak. Now, that sounds kind of mean, but I'll explain a little later. It really wasn't mean. It was Walter doing what he believed and to boycott and to protest what was happening with the churches being closed. So when that occurred, and I remember it was mostly the ladies in the church at the time that day, they came up to the front here and they made the sign of the cross, and they walked to the back. And they started singing, chanting their solidarity Polish songs of protest in the back. And so it was really the ladies that kind of stepped forward, as I remember, as I can recount. So, unfortunately, of course, the church did close that day, November of 2009. And then, here's where we think there was a miracle that occurred. Because our parishioner, Dr. Plemiak, had a dream that evening when the church closed. And he called his friends the next day. He says, Matka Boża, which is a Polish version of Our Lady of Częstochowa. You see the picture there? So Dr. Plemiak, being Polish, used the words Matka Boża, said to him over and over, do not leave me, do not abandon me, do not abandon me, over and over. So he told his friends, he called him, he says, well, what are we going to do, Dr. Plemiak? You know, it's cold, it's November. Well, we're going to meet outside the Polish church next Sunday, in November. We're going to pray to the Blessed Mother for a miracle. Well, as you can imagine, some people are like, you got to be kidding. But a small group came, and led by this gentleman, the people each week, more of them started to come. Some of the Hungarians, where their church was closed, St. Emirates, they heard about it. They started praying. Some of the Irish, St. Pat's, way on the west side, they heard about it. Some of the Slovaks over at St. Wendel, they heard about what was going on because their church is all closed. So they started praying at 11:30. In fact, they would call each other at 11:30 and say, okay, we're going to start praying. Well, this went on for some time. In fact, people wrote to the Plain Dealer saying these people are crazy, there's nothing going to happen. But something did happen. I'll make this long story short. Because 2.5 years later of praying every Sunday outside the closed gates, hoping for a miracle, on the first week of March 2012, the Plain Dealer did an article, and it was the first time the Vatican reordered 13 churches that were closed to be reopened. So this happened. I remember the day. It was a warm Thursday, and people came down to the church here that night after hearing about the news. They scrolled down the TVs, I remember. And they hugged each other, and they cried, and they gave thanks. But what makes it so interesting is that when it happened. First week of March. Anybody knows whose feast day it is on the first week of March? When this happened? St. Casimir, who had such a strong allegiance to the Blessed Mother, when he was buried with a poem that he used to recite to the Blessed Mother every day. And, you know, we feel that the timing of this was more than just a coincidence. There's been 4 families that I know that have said since the church reopened, that said that they've experienced miracles for their families since the church reopened. So the Blessed Mother said, do not leave me. And you are here. And we're so happy about that. So when the grand opening then of the church in July of 2012, we had, like Joe said, that this place holds a lot of people. And yeah, it sure did that day. On July the 15th, 2012, this place was packed, like 1,200 people.
Out the doors on the sidewalk.
It was a warm, hot day. Just a quick story is that the ladies that clean the church, in fact, they're going to be here today. They do a great job. And they said, John, are you going to come into church and see the church? Because it's been closed for 2.5 years. I said, I'm not coming into the church until the first Mass. Well, that warm Sunday, July 15th, 1,200 people came into the church. I'm standing in the back outside the church. And the Mass is getting ready to start. I'm getting ready to walk into church finally after 2.5 years. I can't get in. It's a true story. I can't get in. And so I stood outside the back of the church for the entire Mass until I get a little choked up about this. I don't even know if you know the story. Because the first time I'm telling it during the tour. Because during the giving of the gifts, I was in the back, and one of the parishioners saw me. He says, John, take up the hosts. And I'm like, what? So here now, I'm walking up the aisle for the first time in 2.5 years, but I'm carrying the hosts. And I'm overcome now. You can imagine how overcome I was that day. but anyways, on that warm July day, the Plain Dealer did a beautiful story about what happened about the reopening church. You don't usually see religious type stories, of course, in the public newspaper, but the Plain Dealer did a wonderful story because on July 16th, this shows, is that they had a picture of, in the front page news, joyful parishioners returned to reopen St. Casimir Church. And what appeared was this, and this was not planned.
On the Monday after.
This is the picture that Dr. Klemyak had his dream about. And now it's in the front page of the Pointing Mirror for the world to see. And they didn't put it in there, they didn't know nothing about the dream. Yet that picture there. Yeah. Okay. You know, I feel a lot of people here there's been some miraculous things that occurred here. Getting back to the church itself here, I do want to point out, you see the two little angles about the railroad there on the left side of it? Okay? Back in when the church was being built around 1917, of course, it wasn't running water. And so the artists captured two children carrying buckets of water from the Golden Tree down just a couple blocks away here, carrying buckets of water up to mix the mortar with the church. So that's what those little faces are. The altar is made out of wood, ivory, and marble. It comes from a factory in Chicago. That's still going. The Pieta is something you need to see before you leave. It is extremely rare. Why? Because it has St. John with it. And also because there's only 2 or 3 left in the world, we believe, because the factory burned down that made the Pietas. So when the church reopened in 2012, of course, we wanted to make sure that the Pieta was here. Thank God it is. There's a few things missing that we're still trying to get. Stained glass windows, that's another story. Thank goodness they're all intact. I can recall as when we were on the streets praying one Sunday when the church was closed, one of the people praying with us says, my cousin in Florida, they're building a new church and they're coming up to Cleveland, she told me, to look at stained glass windows. And I'm like, oh. Sure enough, I contacted Father Stephen down in Florida.
And bells.
Father Stephen, and he says, yeah, we're looking at this, those beautiful stained glass windows. I said, Father, don't you know this church is closed? It's under appeal. And he did not know. At least he told me he did not know. So he stopped going after the windows. So thank God the windows are still here. But that's about all I wanted to present, Joe. I know Father's got a funeral here. But again, the Blessed Mother said, do not leave me, and you're here. And I'm so thankful, and we've got only one Mass at 11:30. We've got a small congregation, but believe me, I don't know any congregation that works as hard as these people. I think Father would probably that, because they've seen what it takes to build this church, to reopen it, and the miracles that have occurred. Thank you.
I'm going to add a little bit to John's talk. You know, this whole district was called Poznań, and it was called Poznań because that's the city in western Poland. It was conquered by Prussia. A lot of the people came from the start this parish and St. Stanislaus, and also they came from Vilna, because Poland was once all Poland, Lithuania, Ruthenia, which they called White Russia, and like about a third of the Ukraine. Lviv, that's a Polish city in Ukraine, so they have Polish ties to us. And a lot of the Slavic population, the tribes, the Polish tribes, are in between the Elbe and the Odra. So if you do a DNA test, and you say it goes all the way to the Elbe, that's because those are Slav tribes over there. They were conquered and Christianized by the emperor, the German Empire. And so the Polish border kind of went to the Odra and on the other side. And they call those people Lucanians, Sorbs, Wends, but those are like Polish tribes. Because I had a relative that was a POW around Berlin, and he said outside the city of Berlin, he said, because they put him on work details, there was villages that spoke ancient Polish language. They didn't know who they were during the Second World War. So, you know, they have influx of people. And then in the Middle Ages, after the Mongols went through Poland, they had, about the year 1200 something, they killed half the population, and they invited settlers in from Belgium, France, Germany. So Krakow, they gave German law, so a lot of settlers came there. about 2000, and then people came in from the countryside, intermarried. So some people from Krakow have a German name from, 800 years ago. So, again, it's a country of Europe in the middle between the East and the West, like a vanguard against the Mongols, Turks, and Tartars, so they're famous for that. So again, you have a lot of people here from the Poznan area of Poland and from Vilna, Lithuanian area. My godmother was born in Lithuania. She was Polish. So, and then also too, this altar here, made by Italian company, is worth a minimum of $500,000. And that piazza is made by an Italian company in St. Louis that had a fire. I was told by the guy that has the museum in the former Polish church, St. Hedwig, St. Jadwiga in Lakewood, that is the most exquisite piazza in the whole United States. And minimum $500,000. So again, our Lady Czestochowa disappeared. We don't know, but it's someplace in the world. One of these days we'll find out. And in the back there's an altar in the back there, Lady of Perpetual Help. You'll always see Lady of Perpetual Help in the Slavic churches and in the Lithuanian churches, and even a lot of the people here, some of the people here, they're kind of like mixed Lithuanian and Polish too, from the old Commonwealth, I call it, even though it was conquered by Russia, Prussia, and Austria. I'm trying to think of anything else. Again, and some of the people who were out on the street, we were there every Sunday. Even Christmas Day, Easter Day, we'd go to Mass someplace else to get here. Sometimes it was cold, it was fog and ice and rain, and sometimes the sun would come out temporarily. And we were over, our fingers were freezing, we put the hood. No one ever got sick, but we were always in the front. In the church, in the news media from all the whole world was following us. We were well known in the Vatican. Our articles appeared in Budapest in the papers all over, because what we did, we were sticking up for all Catholics, and that's what was so important. And we have a group of Irish people that come here. They come about twice a month. They're attorneys and everything, way from far west side. And we started marching in the St. Patrick's Day Parade. We're one of the most popular units. We've been doing it for 10, 11 years. We call it Cleveland Polonia. We don't have any bosses. I put somebody in the front line. We have 25, 30, 40 people, and they really like us. So, and it's a lot of fun. We made a lot of friends, and we got a lot of cheers from the sidelines, and as people identify with us. Because we usually have some Slovaks with us, Slovenians with us, and carry the flags, and we have some Irishmen with us too. So it's just fantastic. And again, a lot of our parishioners came from some of the other Polish parishes, because I always used to go to Polish Mass with my mother. I was going to Peter and Paul, and they kind of depolonized it. And so that's the way I brought up. So I go over here, and my dad, being a Rusin, Greek Catholic, he always told me, make sure you go to the Polish church. He's buried in an Orthodox cemetery. But those are all things that happen here. And you see that little cross over there by John Paul? That came from Mexico City. There was a woman married to a Mexican fella. She was a U.S. Marine. And she went to Mexico City, and she brought that, because her husband was separated from the family. And her kids were born in the United States. So she made a pilgrimage to Mexico City, and eventually they reunited with her husband. But hey, if you can sing, you come up in the choir a lot and have me singing. If I would have known I could sing, I could have started off early and learned music. Maybe extra money. I mean, our acoustics are great here. I'll give you a demonstration. Oh Lord my God, when I am someone, consider all the worlds that I made. So, I mean, you could become a star here. A soldier of Christ. The next time you come up, that banner will be up there. We trust in Jesus. Now, if you have any questions.
I got one thing, Joe, I forgot to end my story about Walter. Otherwise, he's going to be mad at me. Because I don't want to end it just thinking he pulled the plug on the bishop. That's not cool. So Walter, thank God, he got to see the church reopen. He was 99 years old. He got to see the church reopen. And I remember him coming up to me in the hall next door, because it was going to be a happy occasion the following week, because the bishop was coming back to the church to install Father Eric as our priest, okay? So Walter came up to me, and as Walter would do with his broken accent, he used to shake hands with two hands. He used to grab your hand. He says, John, are you coming next week? Are you coming next week? The bishop is coming. He was so excited to see the bishop again. And I said, yeah, of course I'm going to be here, Walter. And he sat right here in his Polish uniform. And he was the first one to get communion from the bishop. You see, he held no grudge. No, true.
He sat there, I sat here. And he received, because the girls, they were going to give a speech to Father Eric when he was installed. This is a couple of months after the church opened up. And he said, Joe, you do it. So Walter sat there at communion, and I went to communion. And then I knew that Bishop Lennon didn't like to use any, non-English words. So I made sure, I said, Matka Boska Czysto Hoska. And I used a couple of Polish phrases.
But Walter fought for everything he believes in. But at the same time, he also forgave what happened. So he did greet the bishop again. So it's a learning from Walter that why he's a hero. And then on his deathbed, okay, he fought one more time, Walter the fighter, to live to be 100 years old. So 100 years,
February 10th,
100 years and like a week, 2 weeks, he was on his deathbed, and people were asking him, Walter, why did you do that? Joe asked him on his deathbed. And Joe, what did he say?
Well, here's what happened. It was February, he had just turned 100, 8 days earlier, 2013, as the church opened up in July. And when they had the procession in the church, Walter joined the altar boys. He came up, and everybody applauded, because everybody knew who he was. He was only 5'4", 5'5". Spunky, thin, and he did everything. On his funeral, Father Eric at the funeral, 4 priests had the mass at Mount and he says, Walter did everything. He watered the plants, he prepared the readings, he opened up the church, he cleaned, he did gardening, and also too, Walter, when it called for, he became a little electrician. He cut the electricity out during Mass. So that was Walter. He contributed, and on his deathbed, because the Washington Post, LA Times, New York Times are all calling. They want to interview him. And he was on oxygen, but he was sharp. And I says, Walter, you want to see them? He says, no. He says, I don't want them to see me in this condition. Okay, so Walter, what do I tell him? Why you did what you did? And he says, you do what you can do when you're called upon. And I gave that information to the media, and then Plain Dealer wanted a big story, so I wrote 3-4 pages, and they were figuring where to put it. Page 1, they put it at the top of the obituary, because everybody always reads the obituary. They got 3/4 of the page, and I was in bank at Third Federal in Parma about 2 weeks later, and the women were talking in line in front of me. Did you read about that story of that Polish army soldier that pulled the plug on the bishop and everything? Because it was really, that story went viral. Peter Bory, the Boston Catholic activist, he tells that story wherever he goes in the United States or around the world about Walter. So see, Walter was, why he didn't go back to Poland, because part of Poland he was from was Belarus. The white Russian, right over the border, Grodno. There was a big battle there in the 1800s, Grodno. And his son, his wife, he never saw again because they couldn't have contact with him, or they might have been sent away. So he couldn't go back there. He could have went to the western part of Poland, which was left, but he chose just to stay here. So he never saw his wife again. She died. He never saw his son, but his son had a big picture of the family, huge family, nice-looking people, and that was it. That was the whole story of Walter, and that was his life. So if you any questions you might have, you could ask us, or you could walk around, you could take pictures.
We only have about 15 minutes. If you have an individual question, you want to ask Joe or John Nelson here, but then, in about 15 minutes, we'll be taking off.
Okay, thank you. Also, too, I got some little things. So this way you know